I was speaking at a retreat once, and we had a cement floor, and I had a music stand. And I was standing up talking, and all of a sudden, the whole crowd there's just a gasp, a sudden inhalation. They just went, and out of the bottom of my eyes, I saw the music stand flip over, and my laptop hit the cement floor down there. And without thinking, because I'm focused on what I think, I pick my laptop up, and in the impact, it hit a corner, and this whole section here was now bent concave. No, it was bent concave. It was not the right shape. Maybe it was bent across here. So without thinking, I continued to talk. I put over my knee and I bent it back into shape. And even as I'm bending it back into shape, I said, "No, that's not what you should be doing." It still kept working, thank God, but it was now a wrong-shaped laptop. And it turned out there's some sort of magnesium frame had broken in two places. And had to get another computer, so I'm always a little paranoid about that. Making sure the thing is right. So we good? I think, hopefully.
You do things by instinct when you're leading, and you're like, "Oh!" Like I've had guitar straps, and then you're standing on one knee, and you're like, "Okay, this is interesting."
I'll tell you a funny incident. So I was a formal debate against Quinton Smith, a philosopher, atheist philosopher. And we were in front of hundreds of people, and there was a table there for him, a table for me, and they'd given us each a full-size jug of water. Like, we're talking the big jug and a glass. So you're focused on the debate, you're thinking about what he's saying, you're thinking about what you should respond next, and I'm just pouring water and tossing her down and working away completely. So the formal part of the debate ends, and then you go into an hour of Q&A from the crowd. And I realized, I'm not sure. I think I might be needing to visit the bathroom soon. And I looked with horror at the jug, and it was almost completely empty. There was this much left, and it was like a big jug of water. And I thought, oh goodness.
Sabotage.
Oh goodness. And so the Q&A started 15 minutes into the Q&A. Somebody asked me a question, and I knew that I need to disappear off stage right now, or there's going to be a problem. And so I just said, I held up the jug and said, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I've drunk this whole thing. I got to get out of here for a minute. I'll be right back. Quentin, you take the question. He did a good job. So lots of embarrassing experiences this morning. At some point, I guess I forgot to connect. At some point here we need to connect. There it goes. So I want to talk about deception, and a lot of this stuff is really, really current. Well, it's all current, but some of the things, I'm involved up to my neck in right now as we speak, in working with people and confronting people in Christian leadership. I hate this word confronting, but I'm not a confronter, but sometimes you have to have a chat with people. And I'm involved in one of those chats right now, and the question in my mind is, how could he have been so badly deceived? How could he have been so badly deceived, and how could so many people be so badly deceived? So this has been going on for a number of months. I've put this talk together. I think it's critical that we understand how we can be deceived. And once we're aware of different ways we can be deceived, we're much more protected. So by way of preview here, I want to look at the reality of deception in our culture. Then I want to look at probably the three most powerful influences in deception that every one of us experience. And then I want to look at how do we recognize when we are being deceived, or when we see people when deception is happening, how do you see it? And then finally, how do we avoid being deceived? So let's start with the reality of deception. The main idea here is that we navigate our lives through a world where deception is pervasive, continuous, and normal. And, I got this painting of a ship navigating through icebergs, and this, I think that what we navigate through would be like this painting, except the icebergs are much closer together, and we're actually bumping against them. So first of all, it's very important that we become more conscious of the fact that Jesus referred to Satan as the ruler of this world, and there is a very real father of lies active in this world. He said there is no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature. For he is a liar and the father of lies. And I think a lot of times we just live our daily lives and we don't really, we know the father of lies is out there somewhere. They're letting the occasional lie loose, that sort of thing. But no, it's much worse than that. We are dealing with the ruler of this world here in this life. We are dealing with the ruler of this world, who actually doesn't have that position if God didn't permit it. But we are dealing with a being who, as the ruler of this world, is the ultimate puppeteer of governments and media and so forth. Ruler of this world, it means you have some sort of power over the world, the governments, the individuals, the media and so forth. He is capable of a level of complex, as the father of lies here, he's capable of a level of complex deception that far exceeds the capabilities of individuals, media, and governments. He is the one who, as the father of lies, is the master of misinformation. I told my kids when they were younger, I says, the older you get, the more challenging you will find it to tell the truth. And they, what do you mean? You're more tempted to tell lies, Dad? Is that, no, not really. It's that when you're young, you think that untruth is just lies, a bald-faced lie. Oh, there's a bald-faced lie. But as you get older, you begin to realize, well, there's all sorts of different ways to weave and smoke and mirrors and deceive and mislead people and misinform people and subtle ways to do this and that. And it becomes, you realize this isn't just a simple matter of recognizing lies or not telling lies. It also goes way beyond that to something more complex. And this is the father of lies. My point is this, is that I think sometimes we can vastly underestimate the enemy. And if you read anything about any kind of battles in medieval times or even in present day, underestimating the enemy can be a fatal mistake. We have to know what we're up against. Here's an example. I hear this a lot. Science is the bastion of truth. It's the gold standard. It's the our ultimate arbiter of truth. Here's the reality. No, Nature is probably the most prestigious science journal in the world. If you can get a paper published in Nature for a scientist, that's like an athlete winning a gold medal at the Olympics. It is really hard to get a paper published in Nature, and it is the most widely read journal in the world. So in 2012, Nature had an interesting article. They looked at landmark papers in the area of oncology and hematology. These were not just papers published in peer-reviewed journals. These were landmark papers that really advanced our understanding in these different areas. They were huge, and they began to be cited by hundreds of other papers. So they said, well, let's go back and look at the landmark papers. And they found that 89% of them could not be replicated.
What does that mean?
That when they actually went to the lab and said, okay, here's what the paper did. They did these experiments and these are the results. And they published this, and this is a big deal, like we've made an advance here. Well, let's go back to the lab and see if we can do that same experiment and get the same results they did. And they found that 89% they could not get the same results. Well, this was a big deal in the world of science. And there were a lot of other, I have a bibliography probably of about 30 articles, scientific articles, that this is really, okay, what's going on here? 5 years later, in 2017, Nature published another paper. And in that 5-year interim period, there had been a lot of investigations. What's going on in the area of peer-reviewed science? Numerous, and I'm quoting here, numerous studies, most recently in psychology and cancer biology, have confirmed that the failure to replicate published findings is the norm. Now that phrase is important, the norm. What the norm means is that when you see a peer-reviewed paper published in a journal of science, it's more likely to be false than it is to be true. By false, it means you cannot replicate those things. So what's going on? Here it is, and they published it right there. I'm just quoting from them. They said it's perverse incentives. It's competition for funding. It's pressure to publish. It's academic prestige.
That means either the people that are running the magazine don't care if things are true, or because why would you let them publish something that's totally untrue?
Well, the thing is though, as a scientist, from time to time, a journal will send me a paper to review. And these things are highly technical. It's like, I am very selective. Most of the time I'll say this is outside my scope. I am not qualified to review this paper. Save myself a lot of work, but sometimes I have, because it is in my scope, and I have to be honest. It's a lot of work, but it's even more work if it's on experiments that ran for like 2 years and cost like hundreds of thousands of dollars to run. The reviewers, they can't possibly rerun these experiments. They just read and they think, well, it looks like they did things right. This also spilled into the humanities in the area of psychology and sociology. There's a lot of papers out there. They found the problem was even worse there. And primarily it was in the statistical analysis of their data. Now, that starts another whole discussion. Well, if I'm going into the sciences, what can I do? How am I going to not step in one of these holes? Now, keep in mind here, the problem is not science itself. The problem is the human beings doing science. So if you have human beings doing anything, the father of lies has access to them. And the father of lies is interested in destroying and corrupting anything at all that God does or humans do. His objective, he is the destroyer. He prowls throughout this world like a roaring lion, seeking those that he can destroy. He'll destroy individuals, he'll destroy governments, he'll destroy marriages. Anything that's good and wholesome he wants to destroy. That includes science. I love science. We're going to talk about just one talk in science later on. There is, but unfortunately, there's humans involved. Now, here's the point. If it's this bad in science, where you can actually test the results in a lab, somebody else can go to a lab somewhere and test what you said to see if it's true or false, then what about our knowledge of God and what he has revealed in the scriptures, where we can't just say, oh, go down the hall, room number 75, they'll run that experiment on eschatology and we'll have the results too by next week. You can't do that in spiritual things. So if it's this bad in science, how bad is it everywhere else? Okay, I just want you to be aware that there is a father of lies in this world, and he's probably a lot more active, but superbly working behind the scenes. So it's very easy to deceive. Next section here, 3 major influences in deception. And here they are. The main idea is you are most powerfully influenced through either a personal vice, a wrong attitude that you have, a close relationship, and culture. Now, some of these things like close relationship can be influenced for good or for bad, go either way. Personal vices and bad attitudes never influence you for the good. Although you can learn lessons from them and you can watch other people that are being strangled by those things and learn from them as well. Culture, usually not heading in the right direction, usually. So let's take a look at these 3 things in more detail. By the way, anytime your hand wants to come up, just let that rip, because it's just not me talking here. Personal vice. A personal sin that you continue to practice or wrong attitude will slowly spread and twist your thinking. It doesn't happen just suddenly. It's a slow twisting of the way you see things. My wife and I have, from time to time, we've heard some relative, some famous person, and oftentimes someone we knew for decades, and then they hit the fan, and then everything comes out, and oh man. And my wife and I have sat there and thought, we've known this person for years. Did we see this coming? Did we see this coming? And then often we did. But it was so small back then. Like, one of the things Patty and I have learned is that there is no sin that is too small to ignore, because it will grow like a tumor. And I see disasters even unfolding as I speak at this point in my life, because the older you get, the longer you get to watch people live their lives, and mistakes and little things weren't dealt with at the beginning just grew and grew. And some of them, in some cases, it destroyed them. It destroyed them financially. It destroyed their marriage and their family. Absolutely annihilated their witness for Jesus Christ. So let's take a dive into personal vices, and well, I don't mean let's go there, but I mean let's do it, but let's understand it better. Again, you saw this verse yesterday, but I want to come back to it. Take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. But encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers of Christ if we hold fast the beginning of our assurance firm until the end. Now, there's a couple of things I want to focus on here. Brethren. He's speaking to believers here, and that's an interesting study in and of itself. If you look up how the word brethren is used in the New Testament, and even false brethren, you see there's a pretty clear distinction between false brethren and brethren. And the term false brethren is used, those people who are pretending they're believers or followers of Christ when in fact they are not. But here he's writing to brethren, and he's talking about falling away from the living God. Whatever that is, it's not good. But here's the real thing. This big long line here we got right about there. Deceitfulness, that Greek word there. Seductive, pleasurable deception. So the thing is that if often you can, there may be a little sin in your life, you call it little, you think it's little, and it's there, you're not dealing with it because you enjoy it. It helps you make it through the day, whatever it may be. It's a pleasurable thing, and it seduces you to eventually go deeper into that sin. I heard a phrase once, can I remember that? He went way further. It took him way further, way faster, and was far more costly than he ever imagined when he started. I can't remember what the context was. There was some guy who did something terrible and destroyed his witness for Christ, but started small, went way faster, took him way further, and was far more costly than he ever dreamed. I've seen people in an old folks' home. There was a man in my grandmother died at the age of 93. I'd go off to go visit her. And I wheeled her one Sunday morning to the little chapel service. And it was a room this size, no bigger, maybe slightly smaller. There's a retired pastor and his wife and kids. That's their thing. They just do little chapel services for the old folks' home. It's so good to serve the old people. And it's a quiet thing, and all of a sudden, I'm sitting about where that, about where the second table is, and there's a gigantic F-bomb from the back of the room over there. And what? Like, is this guy ripped off at the service, or what? I look back. No, I found out later. No, and I knew, because I knew him for decades. He used to be the manager of the local grocery store in my hometown. But later on, I found out that was the only word he had left in his vocabulary. He had dementia, and of all the words he'd ever had in his vocabulary over the course of his life, he only had one word left, and it was the F-bomb. Now, my dad happened when he was a teenager, or a young man, I guess 19, 18. He happened to work in that grocery store, and he knew that he did let fly the occasional profanity. Not my dad, but the manager. But back then, it was always very discreet, never in front of ladies, in the back room in the warehouse or whatever. He never dealt with that. Now, to be fair, though, dementia is a whole different ballgame. It's like it's like a mental disability. No filter, it's gone. And so you can't hold, and I spent a lot of time with people with dementia, you can't hold them to the same accountability as us. But all I could think of was, wow, like just one word left and this is it. Another time I was bringing her to supper, a long lineup of wheelchairs. And it's nice. I kind of like the senior citizens home, you know, everything's laid back. There's nobody running around in a rush anymore. It's not like we got a schedule. I'd always phone my grandmother, hey grandmother, I think I'd like to come visit you tomorrow. Like, just want to check and see if your schedule's okay for around 3 o'clock. And she would always laugh. Yeah, no, my schedule's free, you know. She was very sharp. Her body was done, but she was very sharp mentally. Again, poor guy, former manager, lets fly with his one-word vocabulary in that lineup. So, little sins, little problems can grow bigger and bigger and bigger. But at the same time, when I'm talking about dementia here, sometimes it does require an act of the will and intentionality to lay aside the old nature. So don't assume that just because you're trying to walk with the Lord, if dementia hits, that you're going to still be on your best behavior. Don't assume that either. And don't judge those who do have dementia yet seem more cranky and ornery when they get dementia either, because the intentionality, their brain, your mind interfaces with your body through the brain, the physical part of your brain. But if the brain is badly damaged, the poor mind says, don't say that word, and the brain is just recording, you know, the old nature that is talked about in the epistles is a little freer. The filter, the restraints are not there as well anymore. Yes?
I experienced that with my grandma. She was someone who worried her whole entire life, and then when she got dementia, she was locked into worry constantly.
Just obsessed,
and it was
yeah.
just horrible to
Yeah.
watch, because you're like, why are you crying? There's no reason to cry.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's so sad.
So I hope none of us get dementia, but the odds are there's a fair chunk in the room. If the Lord doesn't return, we will somehow have to deal with that ourselves and, deal with the little sins now. But I'm not really talking about dementia here. I'm talking about in your normal everyday life when you should be representing God. Here's another one. For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth. There's a couple of things I want to point out here. They will not put up. That Greek word, by the way, if you see BDAG there, that's just Bauer, Danker, Arndt, Gingrich lexicon, which my Greek prof says this is the best for first century Greek. And generally that seems to be the agreements out there. So just my reference as to where I get that definition from is to regard with tolerance. That's put up. But the time will come when people will not regard with tolerance sound doctrine. What that means is they will be intolerant of sound doctrine. It's not that they just ignore it. But if you want to represent, if you want to teach sound doctrine, you're going to get opposition. You may be shown the door of various churches. A friend of mine just got the door. Recently his church went full affirming, gay marriage, you know, the whole thing. And this was a brethren chapel, you know, where your little mantilla for the breaking of the bread service. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the brethren. Very conservative back, you know, like 30 years ago, but totally the other way around. And he was trying to do his best, because he had been a member for so long, to say, wait a sec, the Bible, this is not sound doctrine here, and out the door. They didn't want that. They're intolerant of it. You will find opposition. People will get angry at you. They will cut you off. They will cancel you. They do not put up with sound doctrine. Another thing to note is their desires. And the Greek word there is a desire for something that's forbidden or simply inordinate. It could be a craving or a lust. And they will be ruled by their desires. Their desires will trump sound doctrine, sound teaching. And therefore they will become intolerant of you. And there'll be a great number. It's not like we'll see a few liberal churches here and there. And you may be tempted to look, everybody, all the churches are going this road. Maybe we should be rethinking this. Maybe we should join them, you know, all this kind of thing. No, it's already been foretold that there'll be a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. And note the final phrase, away from the truth. That's deception. They will become deceived. I did a whole quarter once of in a Bible study, studying the role of deception in the scriptures is really quite interesting. So here's a little life observation I've made. For every seduction of sin one embraces, two things happen. Deception sneaks in the back door, while truth and the abundant life depart out the front door. You cannot have both. Deception always comes arm in arm with being seduced by sin. And you start, because your mind becomes twisted, truth leaves. And when truth leaves, the abundant life Jesus Christ promised departs as well. Now the next, for me, the most powerful influence that I've felt the full force of sometimes is the persuasive power of friendships. And that can be a good influence, it can be a bad influence, it depends. So let's look into that more deeply. For example, when our own children or our own closest friends choose to depart from the kind of faith and life that God desires us to live, and they begin to distance themselves from us because of what we believe, there can be enormous pressure or temptation to loosen up, as it were, to loosen up our own understanding of the truth, to maybe reinterpret what the Bible says in order to try and maintain that close friendship. So recently, well, several months ago, of a guy I've known for a year, a friend of mine I've known for more than 30 years, who really took a left turn. And he started spouting all kinds of wrong things, and I made the mistake of reading one of his posts on Facebook, and the even bigger mistake of responding. And it was responding to another question that somebody asked, well, hey, if this is the case, what about that? And I'd take it, oh, there's a discussion. Well, I'll say what I think about this discussion without actually directly addressing or implying that he's got this problem. I'm just saying, here's something to think about. I was talking about culture-led Christianity. Well, his response was pretty clear that he no longer respects me. So it's bad enough to no longer be a friend, but to actually no longer respect you. It was basically hate. Hatred. We're often accused of being haters because we won't affirm something, but I have had a lot of experience being hated, and hatred always goes with departure from the truth, or it seems to go with most of the time. And so a few days later after this, I was outside, and I like to spend time outdoors with the Lord, and it just wasn't happening. I just felt bad. I just felt there was a distaste in my mouth regarding spiritual things. And regarding the things that I hold to be true, there was a distaste there and a discomfort. So why is this? Why is this? And instantly I knew, because my things that I believe are true had now come between me and my friend, to the extent that it is pretty clear that it was a relationship ender. My beliefs were now a relationship ender from his perspective. His weren't from mine. I wanted to get together with him for coffee and talk about these things, but he didn't want to. So it was the end of a relationship, and that's hard when there's something that comes between you and someone that you really care for. That thing can become distasteful in your eyes, and you can be greatly tempted to compromise. But that's where you got to make a decision. And Jesus said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. You cannot follow Christ. Now, I want to look at this word hate. So, again, back to BDAG. There are two flavors of that. It's a Greek word, but there's two flavors of that Greek word. And this particular usage here is this particular flavor. It means, and I'm quoting, to be disinclined to disfavor, disregard, in contrast to preferential treatment. So our natural way we are is that we give preferential treatment to our father and mother, our wife or children, or brothers and sisters, or our closest friends. Preferential treatment. So we'll let things slide. We may compromise, and I know I've done it. We may compromise sometimes on the truth just to keep that relationship, just not rock the boat, so to speak. That doesn't mean you're always just blabbing the truth. We'll come to that shortly. But what he's saying here is that no, when it comes to Christ, or the preferential treatment cannot be there. You cannot give preferential treatment. to your close friends and loved ones. If it comes to shove, the preferential treatment has to go with Christ. That's what he says. And if that's not the case, you cannot be a follower of Christ. That's what he's saying here. You cannot be my disciple. Following Christ means actually following him and not your close loved ones, or not just following him when your close loved ones agree and there's no problem, but if your close loved ones disagree, then and you choose to follow them rather than Christ. Point. It's very likely that over the course of our lives we may have to make a very difficult choice between loving God or compromising to the ultimatum of a close friend or loved one. That ultimatum may be spoken or unspoken. Influence number 3, the relentless daily influence of culture. Mentioned this a little bit yesterday, but I want to look at now the steps of deception through cultural influences. What happens psychologically when you live in a culture that's depraved? Number 1 is desensitization. You're simply being exposed to something that's morally wrong, and you get used to it. Step 2, confusion. So you thought this was really wrong, but you're now getting used to it. And then the question is, did God really say that's wrong? I mean, it looks like he said that, but I'm wondering if I shouldn't take a second look at that, maybe do some reinterpretation or second reading. Did God, then you might have noticed here, this is the same method that Satan used on Eve to deceive her. Did God really say you will die? Does he, really say this? Then step number 3 is unperceived persuasion. At that point, you're being persuaded that, in fact, this, what's seeing in the culture, is right. But you're not aware of it. You're not even conscious of this. Because culture, in a day-to-day, incrementally shapes you. So it's unperceived persuasion. And in your mind, it becomes normalized. You see the normalization in our culture relationships with those who are already persuaded. Step number 4, there reaches a point where you unconsciously accept that, then is okay, it's fine now. But you're not conscious of that yet. If somebody accused you of that, you might push back a bit, just because you haven't realized what internally, subconsciously you've now embraced. So that's the unconscious acceptance, and then one day you realize consciously that you do accept this. I do accept this, and I guess I was wrong before. I'm more enlightened now. I see things. Before I was so dumb I didn't know what I didn't know. But now, and then you could go even further, as my friend has done that I just spoke to you about, to promotion and endorsement of it. You affirm that, you endorse it, you promote it even, maybe. So these are, and different psychologists might nuance this a little better, or a little different, might argue amongst themselves, but basically these are general steps of deception. So James chapter 4, you adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you think that the scripture speaks to no purpose? Quote, he jealously desires the Spirit which he has made to dwell within us. The Holy Spirit, God actually dwells within you in a very real, literal sense, in the person of his Holy Spirit. And this is a relationship via the Holy Spirit directly with God. It's why Jesus says, I will never leave you or forsake you, because he and the Holy Spirit are one, as he and the Father are one, and the three are one. But that is constantly referred to with a metaphor of marriage throughout the scriptures. It's a more close bonding than even human marriage, because it is a bonding of the soul. And you cannot be both married to the culture, you cannot be faithful to God and yet be seduced by the culture. Just as in a normal human marriage, you cannot be faithful to your wife if you're being seduced into an affair with a different woman. So he uses this constantly, even the terminology, adultery. Here's the point. You have entered an eternal covenant with God when you began to follow Jesus Christ, and it's analogous to a marriage covenant. To be seduced into turning from being Christ-led to culture-led is to commit adultery of the soul, the most serious form of adultery possible. And I'm not talking abandoning Christianity here necessarily. I'm talking about something I call culture-led Christianity, where culture becomes what leads you in your theology, in your reading of the scriptures, if you actually read it anymore. Warning. Truth must be bounded with grace. Truth without grace is harsh legalism. Grace without truth is merely culture-led lawlessness, what Jesus referred to as lawlessness. You have to have both. Truth and grace. A little quote from John here. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. Part 3. How do we recognize deception in the act? Main idea here is that deception comes in various forms. There are simple ways to recognize and safeguard. You don't need to have a PhD in deception. I've talked with a lot of people with zero education in the area of logic or whatever, but they have what they call a baloney detector. We all got baloney detectors, and you'd be surprised how well that baloney detector works sometimes. But first of all, in order to not be deceived, you have to have a definition of what a true belief is. So in epistemology, there are different great discussions on what a true belief is. But it seems that, but throughout history, there is one type of definition of truth that is constantly the mainstream version, and that is this, called the correspondence theory of truth. A belief is true if and only if it corresponds to reality. So this is why even a moral relativist won't step out in front of a speeding bus on the street, because they may say truth is relative and everything else. Maybe truth is even bigoted and racist. But when it comes to stepping out in front of a speeding bus, they don't do it because they know there's a reality out there, and that speeding bus is part of it, and there's very big consequences if they step in front of the speeding bus, transit bus. So it's something it's the way we instinctively operate in this world. We need to remember that, because it's not just physical reality we're worried about. It's not just science, scientific truth. What about moral truth? In order to have moral truth, there has to be a moral reality out there that we can look at to see if our own moral beliefs are true or false. What about theological truth? There again, there has to be a God out there so that we can look at God to determine whether our theological beliefs are true or false, and so forth. So when Jesus said he is the truth, he didn't say he is true. If he said he is true or he tells the truth, that means there's a standard of there's a reality out there, and what he's saying corresponds to that. That's not what he said. He said he is the truth. What he means is that Jesus Christ is the foundation of reality. If you want to know all truth, you look at Jesus Christ. Not just physically, he has created the worlds, the laws of physics, John chapter 1, but at the same time, he is the standard of moral truth, theological truth. We look to him. He is actually the Word meaning the Trinity has communicated with humanity through Jesus Christ. So we look at the Word, and I'm using it as a proper noun here, to see what is true. In a sea of deception, the rock to which we must be anchored is spiritual reality, and that is defined by God and the Bible that he's given us. We do not define spiritual reality. There's no such thing. Like I went somewhere on the web. I was interested in an historical event, and so I punched it in. I'll see what YouTube has to say. Nice short summary here. I don't have a lot of time. Typed it in, hit the button. Oh, this looks okay. So the lady speaking, she says, what I'm going to tell you about this historical event is my truth, she said. And I'm thinking, I don't want your truth. I want to know what actually happened. Is your truth correspond to what actually happened? I don't know. I'm not sure I want to watch this video because I could be wasting my time. Because my truth should not be confused with the truth. So in a sea of deception, we have to find somewhere to anchor our beliefs. And that's through Jesus Christ and the Bible that he's given us, because the Bible is our best source of information about God and Jesus Christ. So now let's get into some practical application here. Let's talk about sophistry. I'll define that shortly. See to it, writes the Holy Spirit through the Apostle Paul to the believers at Colossae and the rest of the world throughout church history. See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ. Now you might say, oh, I'm not into philosophy, I'm safe there, but no, not really, because I'm a philosopher, I'm a trained philosopher, so you got one of them sitting right here. But this is not exactly what he's talking about, because everything I learn in philosophy always has to be brought back to the scriptures to see, is this true or bogus? We were having a class one day, and the whole discussion in epistemology was whether we exist and whether the prof used the door, so the door was closed. Does the door actually exist? And I'm looking at the door. I already had a degree in engineering. I got a pretty practical view of, yeah, that door exists. And he was going on why the door might not exist, and I'm looking at the class, and I understand what he's saying, and I thought to myself, wow, if this is the best that philosophy has to offer, my prof, the guy who said I'm going to lose my faith, there's no danger of that here. There's no danger. And but philosophy and empty deceptions, what was he talking about? Well, the sophists were traveling philosophers in ancient Greece who were experts in rhetoric. Rhetoric is the art of written or verbal skills of persuasion or argumentation. Now, rhetoric itself isn't good or bad. A friend of mine, who loves the Lord dearly, got her PhD in rhetoric, is now a professor at the University of Waterloo. And I wish I had the command of English and rhetoric. She's from Nigeria. It's not even her mother tongue English, but yet she can persuade me any day of the week. She's amazing. I just like to listen to her as she talks about an essay she marked on this student. And the other student says this, and she said that. And I'm thinking, wow, like I'm just, that's not my gift. The sophists were traveling philosophers skilled in rhetoric, and they did not just exist at the time. They began to increase throughout the first century. So when Paul's writing this, he's warning against the sophists, these philosophers who were skilled in persuasion. So ChatGPT here, you can't trust ChatGPT all the time, but I know enough about sophistry, so I just said I'll just get a quick definition here. Sophistry refers to the use of fallacious reasoning and manipulation of language to deceive or mislead others. It is a problem that has existed for centuries and continues to be relevant today in various forms. People may be misled into making decisions based on false or distorted information, leading to negative outcomes for individuals, community, and society as a whole. So sophistry, as coming from a philosopher who's actually studied sophistry and been subjected to it in tons of formal debates, sophistry is more rampant today than it ever has been in human history, simply because of the social media, the explosion in media. And sophistry just runs rampant, completely unleashed, unbridled. So this is what we have to watch out for, is sophistry. This kind of fancy stuff. Now, it's not easy. Red flags for sophistry within Christian discussions. We're going to focus on Christian discussions here. If you see an entire book or a 1-hour video that argue for a new teaching in history of the church, here's something new, 2,000 years of church history, and then all of a sudden this person writes a whole book and says, well, actually, it doesn't mean all this, and what it means is that. Then it doesn't mean that it's false, it means you better have a red flag about that. Now, one of the aspects of sophistry is that you usually need to do a lot of talking. It requires persuasion, especially if what you're trying to convince them is something that's totally the opposite of what the Bible clearly seems to say.
Is that not totally the opposite of Jesus, who literally at his trial was like silent? He's like, you already know the truth.
I just read that this morning in my devotions in Mark, Jesus totally silent. What are you silent for? And I'm thinking there, there's a time where it's so bad. There's just like, that nothing you can say is going to help. It's already made the decision, so there's no point in even talking. That could be one of the reasons that Jesus was silent. Or it could be another reason because Jesus had to be careful what he said, because his divinity he could be very persuasive. So how did he cleanse the temple? Like, if I went into the temple and tried to kick everybody out, the temple police would have me out the door real fast. There was something about him that when he became angry, no human could stand against that. When they arrested him in the garden, and he says, who are you looking for? And they said, we're looking for Jesus. And he says, in English, it'll often say, I am he, but if you look at it in Greek, it's just simply, I am. And what happens? The whole cohort of 600 men do a face plant on the ground. And then it's almost, and I'm paraphrasing here, he says, let's get on with it. Almost giving them permission and telling them to get back, stand up again. Let's get the show on the road. So that might be another reason he was silent in his trial, so-called trial. There could be a couple of different reasons. But cherry picking, glossing over, ignoring, explaining away passages don't fit, that's all aspects of sophistry. It could include inserting phrases or not mentioning phrases in the text. Now, literally, you will seldom find them actually insert, phrase literally into the text. But what they will, as they talk, they'll say, well, this is, yeah, I understand what it says here, but it didn't say about this, and so there's an exception here. Here's the exception. And I go back to, so they've inserted an exception into the phrase, or into the verse. So you go back to the verse and you read the verse and you say, oh, that exception isn't actually there. You can't do that. You can't be inserting exceptions into the scriptures unless there's other passages that expand on this, and then that's legit. You take all those passages together. Arguing against the face value understanding of the text. I'm not advocating to be too simplistic on this, but chances are if the face value meaning of the text is very clear, you need to think long and hard if someone comes along with an hour-long attempt to overthrow that. Here's something else about sophistry. The most appealing type of sophistry often occurs when you hear a brilliant, persuasive speech or book, but afterward, when you attempt to construct a concise summary in terms of its conclusion and the key premises that led to that conclusion, you find that either the conclusion does not follow from the premises, or at least one of the premises is a little bit sketchy, or there weren't really much in the way of any premises at all. It was all a brilliant sales job. Like when you go to buy a piece of trash for a used car, and the salesman makes it look like this is the best thing, even better than a Porsche, BMW, whatever. You need this. You need this junker over here, but he's not going to call it a junker. So, and often sophistry today occurs within the context of brilliant scholarship. Take that to the bank, brilliant scholarship. So that raises the next question, which scholar should I believe? And I often hear this. This scholar says that, and that scholar says the opposite. How am I supposed to know what to believe? Disclaimer, there are legitimate Christian discussions. Eschatology, there are so many things we can discuss in the scriptures that are not absolutely cut and dried and crystal clear. Eschatology, I just throw that out as well. Does Christ return just before the abomination of desolation, just afterwards, before the trib, towards the end of the great tribulation? Well, people argue about these things. What about angels? Like how many different kinds are there? And so there are legitimate Christian discussions that are not simple. And you can have brilliant scholars who have a high view of Scripture that don't agree with one another. So that's my disclaimer here. But the first thing to remember is that not all arguments are of equal weight. The mere fact that a scholar is speaking or writing means nothing in terms of credibility. And I've been in the halls of science and philosophy long enough to know that, there's philosophers who flat out contradict one another. Scholars, famous scholars, flat out contradict. They can't both be true. So it doesn't mean a thing whether if a scholar says this and that scholar says that. We have to dive into that and see, well, which arguments carry more weight? So I was watching a video recently that's now another issue I'm involved in for a major Christian organization. And it's talking about theology of sexuality. And so right in the first minute and a half, the main person says, there is a huge spectrum of beliefs in the theology of sexuality. But we don't need to go there. We'll set that aside and move ahead with their objective. Now, if you thought you believed something that's true, and you hadn't really had it tested by anybody, but then somebody else comes along and say, actually, there are about 8 different views on this, and they all carry equal weight, you'd probably push back a little bit. Equal weight? Wait a sec. Equal weight? But if the person says, actually, there are about 8 different views on this, and they cut it off there, that has a powerful rhetorical effect. Because it suddenly, in your subconscious mind, your subconscious thing will what kind of weight do these things have? You instantly apply a certain amount of weight. You haven't consciously figured out how much weight, but a certain amount of weight to each of the 8. And every bit of weight you apply to each of the 8 means you subtract some weight from what you thought was true. It's a subtle way of undermining a person's belief. The first step of it's like softening them up. You just crack the foundation slightly. So you got to watch out for that. And the point here is not all arguments are of equal weight. Now, if you're going to be wrong, you better be brilliant. There's this phrase somebody said, I forget who said it. If you're going to be stupid, you got to be tough. And if you want to understand what he means by that, just go to YouTube, type in fail, and then you'll see lots of people doing stupid things, and you'll understand why you got to be tough if you're going to do stupid things. But there's a corollary, or a similar one, and that's if you're going to be wrong, you had better be brilliant. So don't ever mistake a brilliant speaker or person or writer of a book or author and think that therefore they're right or this carries a lot of weight. It's what they say that counts, not who says it, not what kind of a degree they have behind their name. Solution. Here it is. We see it in the book of Acts. The brethren immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea, and when they arrived, they went into the synagogue. Oh, we got to quit. Okay, we'll just finish this one page and quit, and then we'll pick it up in this next seminar. Now, these are more noble-minded than those in Thessalonica, for they received the word with great eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see whether these things were so. This is the Apostle Paul himself. He wrote a good chunk of the New Testament. And if they questioned, if they didn't just simply blindly accept what the Apostle Paul said, but they went back to the scriptures to see if what he's saying is true, and then God refers them through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit as more noble-minded, then we know that's a good thing. Don't ever, start with me, don't ever trust a word I say. I say that a lot. Don't ever trust a word I say when I'm giving a seminar or preaching a sermon or whatever. Always go back to the scriptures to see if these things are so. Let's quit. Come back like at 10 o'clock. We'll pick it up from here.